welcome into DawgNation at Large. I'm Kaylee Mansell, and this week I am joined by a very special guest. I'm so excited to have the host of DawgNation Daily, Brandon Adams, as a part of our show this week.
Kaylee, it is a pleasure to be with you. You have been on my shows plenty of times. This is one of my few times to be on one of your shows. Obviously, I'm a big fan of DawgNation at Large, and now I get to be a part of DawgNation at Large. So I am thrilled about that.
I feel like Connor Riley and I have talked multiple times on this show about who our dream guest would be. And honestly, Brandon, I feel like you would be my dream guest.
Well, that's a huge compliment, Kaylee. I tell you what, I really appreciate that. I hope to live up to that. I hope that after this show is done, it doesn't turn into, oh gosh, that was a big disaster. So hopefully I will live up to dream guest status.
I think this just goes to show that here on DawgNation at Large, dreams really do come true.
It's the show for the new breed of Georgia Bulldog fan. This is DawgNation at Large with DawgNation insiders Connor Riley and Kaylee Mansell.
Of course, with Brandon Adams here today, we have to have a special show prepared. I'm excited to take a look back at something that Brandon said on DawgNation Daily and bring it to life here on DawgNation at Large. So one of the things that we're going to do is, what is the information that you can trust about fall camp, just based on the little tidbits and takeaways that we heard. And then, of course, our Dog Bite segment this week, it's going to be Brandon's breakout stars. Who are the 5 Georgia players he expects to break through this season? Then we'll have him join us for our Meme Machine segment, where we'll share our favorite tweet or meme of the week. And for our fun segment today, now that Auburn has started claiming national championships from over the years, what are some things that Georgia should now be able to claim as well? But first, we'll start with this. So a couple of weeks ago on your show, DawgNation Daily, right before fall camp started, you pointed out 3 things that Georgia fans should really pay attention to when hearing the chatter about fall camp. Now, we're going to go through each of those 3 things and decide what we can trust and what we can't based on your guidelines. But first, I want to ask you, as a veteran in this industry, as someone who has covered Georgia football for so long, how did you get to the point where you figured out, okay, like I know I can trust this and I'm not so sure about this, just based on your previous experiences?
Well, I think experience is the key word there, because when you kind of go through the same thing year after year after year, you sort of realize that, like the preseason, for instance, there's a certain cadence to it. And this year does kind of remind you of last year or the year before that, where you sort of notice some of the same stuff popping up. And honestly, that's probably the best thing about getting older, is you do have kind of repeated experiences that hopefully give you something in the way of wisdom. And as it relates to Georgia football, when you see these things happen, you're like, oh, I guess in a roundabout way, this sort of almost happens every year. And it does, I think, prepare you for when it happens again. Well, okay, this kind of reminds me of things I've experienced before.
I feel like this particular episode of DawgNation Daily that I got to listen to these guidelines was one of the most enlightening for me, because it gave me something to base things off of. So we'll go ahead and take a look at rule number 1 right here, which I think could be the most important of them all, which is good news often leaks, bad news rarely does. So we're going to focus on that first one right there, which is good news often leaks. And I think that the perfect example of this is all the things that we heard about Ellis Robinson during fall camp. Had a great interception, was taking reps with the ones, could potentially be the starter at Marshall. And all of this kind of came really fast, especially considering the fact that we hardly heard anything about Ellis Robinson during the spring. So I feel like it's good enough for me to trust, just based on how much we heard about him then and how little we heard about them in the past.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, because a year ago at this time, we weren't, as you say, hearing very much about Ellis. Maybe no fault of his own. He was a young guy trying to figure out his way in the world when it comes to college football. But boy, and you just kind of recited some of this, we're hearing plenty of that now. And look, it is just human nature. It feels good to tell people good news. You know, if I came to you and it's like, hey, Kaylee, wait till you hear ... It just sort of feels good to tell people something they don't know, especially if it's something that they want to hear. And so I think there's a natural incentive structure around people who see practice or know somebody who knows somebody who knows somebody or whatever else. Wait till you hear about what so-and-so did at practice. When that's good news, it's just kind of natural to want to spread the word on that. And that's sort of what we see sometimes happen. You mentioned Ellis Robinson, great example of that, compared to, well, so-and-so may be 10 pounds overweight, or so-and-so may be, head stuck in the clouds or whatever else. That doesn't quite feel quite as good to talk about. And so therefore, there isn't quite as much natural incentive to want to discuss that.
So here's what I need your expertise on. I feel like Ellis Robinson is a really special case because he's essentially a fan favorite with very limited playing time, the highest rated signee of his class. I think that's someone that people want to hear good news about, and therefore people are willing to give a little bit more. So just based on all the things that we heard about Ellis, but there's also this whole other thing of people want to hear about him. Do you think that we can trust the information that's been given to us about Ellis?
Yeah, because another addendum I'd have to that is that when you're hearing like positive stuff coming multiple days, multiple people, it's one thing to hear one thing from one person. That's at least interesting. But when it's a repeated refrain that comes up over and over, I think that becomes more meaningful. And in the case of Ellis Robinson, I don't want to make it sound like he's going to be an all-SEC quarterback. He might. It's just not my guarantee that he will. But I think it's happened enough that there's a very good chance that Robinson may start at cornerback for Georgia this year and perhaps live up to some of the billing of being such an elite recruit, going back to the previous cycle, that when you hear this stuff multiple times from multiple people, I think at that point it becomes more likely grounded in reality.
So we'll shift our attention to somebody else that I feel like benefited from that fall camp chatter. And that's, of course, the quarterback for Georgia, Gunnar Stockton, because there are some skepticisms about him. There's also some people that I feel like are really rooting for him, but also knowing that there's somebody behind Gunnar and Ryan Puglisi that could also have had a chance at some point in time. We heard Gunnar Stockton didn't have to play much in that second scrimmage because he did so well. They got him out of there. They said the offense looked really great, but I feel like this is the one person on the team that you absolutely wanted good news to leak out about.
And I think that's a good point. And I also think it's one of those things where in life, the truth on any subject, any matter, is never going to be 100% of what you want it to be. And so you give a good example. Okay, we hear that Stockton had a very good second scrimmage, perhaps even kind of a short day for him because he performed so well to begin with. Okay, well, the previous scrimmage, I mean, Kaylee, you may say different from based on people you've heard, but what I kind of heard was kind of okay, and not terrible, not great, something kind of in between, kind of okay, mostly did his job. And that's one of the reasons why some of what we hear about Gunnar, I think, comes across as pretty believable, in that the good stuff is tempered with not everything's a fairy tale, not everything's, sunshine and roses. Some of it's only been okay. Rarely have I heard, well, it was a disaster and everything's sort of falling apart. You don't hear that very much, but you have occasionally over the course of, whether it be spring practice or now, heard that for Gunnar and the offense, it's kind of okay. And that's the sort of, I guess, matter-of-fact, practical reality that makes the good stuff you also hear with that just come across as a lot more believable, I would say.
So now we'll go ahead and move on to rule number 2, which is this. And I think we have a really great example of what this is. If the news is good enough, UGA will make us aware of it. Now, that's a shortened version of what you said, but that's essentially the point that you were trying to get across. And even though I don't feel like we've had as many leaked videos from random staffers as we've had in the past, I think that the Georgia football Twitter account went ahead and did that for us. You showed this Monday on DawgNation Daily, but we'll go ahead and show it to you again today. And throughout this video, this was posted by Georgia Football again. This is all from the second scrimmage, but it was mostly wide receivers. And now we heard a lot of good things coming about the wide receivers from the chatter, but this video is trying to highlight every single receiver that went up and got a ball in contention. And this is clearly a group that has to take a step forward this year, under a lot of criticism and pressure last year, to take that massive leap with the pieces that they brought in from the portal, as well as from the recruiting rankings. So Georgia football did this on purpose because they know that the people need a little bit of hope and a little bit of security about this wide receiver room.
Well, there was also the one the other day involving the receivers where they showed Zachariah Branch, and it was against air, right? I mean, he wasn't doing it against a defender, but he put his toe in the turf and cut so hard that, I mean, you were just sort of blown away by the athleticism. It's the kind of thing that I sort of feel sort of dropped in there like an Easter egg for those who find it. And if you know, you know, you get a chance to see that. This is kind of comparing like years ago now when George Pickens was a freshman and there's this like magical video from a scrimmage that somehow found its way on the internet where Pickens sort of makes this wild, crazy one-hand catch. It may still be the best catch Pickens has ever made, even now that he's in the NFL. And it's the sort of thing that we all know that if a Georgia staffer unauthorized put a practice video on the internet, you'd be worse than fired. Whatever beyond fired is, that's what you'd be. So if something like this shows up in the case of Pickens way back in 2019, then my sort of conspiratorial brain would lead me to believe, oh, somebody behind the scenes gave the green light to that because somebody in and around Georgia football thinks it's kind of fun to let us know that something really good happened in practice. They don't have to do that. It's behind closed doors. They can keep it totally on lockdown. Sometimes they do. I would say they don't always do that. If something interesting enough happens, they'll usually kind of find a way to make sure we at least have some awareness of it. And frankly, I'm kind of thankful that they do.
So we focused on the good, but with fall camp, there's also the bad that comes with it. And that's kind of what rule 3 that you stated is focused on, is it's about the bad. This is rule 3. Be careful about what you don't hear. It's kind of like that saying that any publicity is good publicity. Any information that comes out of fall camp, it's better to be talking about it than not. I feel like there's 2 position groups that we didn't hear nearly enough about. And one of them is the running backs. And I feel like when fall camp started and we didn't see Josh McCray out there, that should have been a good indicator to us that things weren't going to go as planned in the first place, because that's probably the one running back that you wanted to hear people talk about. But I feel like we didn't get much about the running backs at all, especially the guys that are getting meaningful reps behind Nate Frazier.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in strong opinions loosely held, meaning the moment new information comes in, I'm more than happy to change my point of view on a dime, just like that, Zachariah Branch style, and go the opposite direction if I need to. But as you mentioned, one of the rules I do follow is when it is quiet on any subject, I do kind of lean in on that and say, well, if something really good was happening, we'd probably be hearing about it. So if we're not hearing anything, does that not mean great news? And in the case of some aspects of the Georgia rushing attack, I sort of feel like we have some of that going on. I think people expect Nate Frazier to be really good. I think that Bo Walker is at least going to play. Certainly, that's a guy that seems to have some admirers. There's an interesting kind of growth around Dwight Phillips right now, which I think is kind of fun to explore. But when it comes to kind of what we think of as, and Mike Bobo the other day described them as the dirty yards, kind of the hard yards between the tackles, in 3 yards in the cloud of dust type stuff, the bigger running backs perhaps, it does sort of feel like some of that for Georgia over the last few weeks has been a little bit quiet. It doesn't prove that it's not going to be great or the running game is going to be deficient or anything like that. But as you said, based on what I'd said previously, I do pay attention to what I don't hear. And some of the stuff around the Georgia running game, I have to admit, ear to the ground, trying to read the tea leaves, some of that does feel a little bit quiet lately to me, Kaylee.
And considering how much we heard Kirby Smart, Mike Bobo, the other assistant coaches talking about the emphasis that they were putting on the run game this fall, how much we heard from them about that and how little we heard about the actual running backs during fall camp, I feel like that didn't really match as much as I would have hoped for. And I kind of feel the same about the next position group, which is the defensive line, because we heard Kirby talk about you want to run the ball, but you also need to stop the run. And we're all big on Christian Miller, but like who else, And after seeing Elo Mendoza at that first day of fall camp, I'm not really sure that he was up to speed with where we kind of hoped. So I feel like we can group the running backs and the defensive line / edge and outside linebackers into this group of, I just wish I would have heard more.
Yeah. To me, that's been kind of one of my, if I'm going to read into the situation, that's one of my bigger kind of read-ins right now of, it would be nice to have a little bit more of a substantial rumor mill around that position group. I agree with you on Christian Miller. There's a chance Miller's one of the best players in the country, and you're glad to have him, but the defensive line requires more than just that. I think they pretty clearly have a fairly strong rotation of players, and an incoming freshman like Elijah Griffin may be really good. But to be the sort of upper tier in the SEC, you need multiple guys kind of playing at a, if not quite first round draft pick level, certainly sort of an NFL draft pick, type level. And I think some of that remains to be seen. And I don't know, based on the people that maybe are, privy to see what happens at practice, I don't know how substantial some of the rumors have been around that over the last few weeks, which at the very least just sort of causes me to raise my eyebrow just a bit.
So as we wrap up the talk on fall camp, we transition into Marshall. Do you have any final takeaways from the things that you heard about fall camp, whether it's good things or things that you wish you would have heard more about?
So the one thing I will say about the second scrimmage, based on, the very moneyed type folks who get a chance to see something like this, or just the privileged few, not only did Gunnar Stockton have a good performance, a lot of that came very early. I was led to believe sort of explosive play right off the bat, a couple of scoring drives sort of right off the bat. And Kaylee, that may be the only thing about the Marshall game that really matters. I have a sneaking suspicion that Marshall may be really bad, even by group of five standards. They may be one of the worst, FBS teams in the country just because of the huge changeover they've had in their roster, brand new coach, everything else. So the only thing that may matter about that game at all might be is whether or not Georgia's able to get off to a fast start. This is a big issue for Georgia in 2024. Even in the early part of 2023, Georgia actually did not get off to some very fast starts in some of those games. So the most watchable part of the Marshall game may be the very beginning of the game, to see if Georgia can maximize its possessions at the beginning of the game. And it sounds like in the second scrimmage they did that. It'd be nice to see that carry over into the start of the regular season next Saturday as well.
Still to come on the show, we've got Brandon's Breakout Stars, our favorite tweets of the week, and then we'll get Brandon's opinion on the things that Georgia should be able to claim. Now that Auburn has started claiming a bunch of national championships, we'll hear from him on that. But first, we want to remind you that here on DawgNation at Large, we are excited to partner with Zagoria Law Firm. And what makes Zagoria Law Firm so unique is that they are the only law firm in the state that specializes in representing people bitten by dogs, as well as those who have been knocked down by dogs. So if you or a loved one has been hurt by someone else's dog, give them a call at 833-GA-DOG-BITE, that's DOGBITE, or visit ZagoriaLaw.com. And with that, let's do Dog Bites. All right, so Dog Bites this week is all going to be Brandon's Breakout Stars, the 5 players that he expects to kind of break through and make a big impact for the season. For Brandon, it all starts with Zachariah Branch, someone that we heard so much about through fall camp. Just the athleticism, the different dynamic he's going to bring to not just the receiver room, but also the special teams. Do you think that he can amount to all this hype and pressure that's already been put on him, Brandon?
Well, I'll tell you this about Zachariah Branch, and I'm ashamed to say this, but it is true. When a former 5-star receiver is at a place like USC, I have a certain picture in my mind of what I think that guy is going to be. And so far, Branch is far different what I imagined him being based on his time speaking to the media during spring practice and what others have said about him. I hate to say it, but I sort of assume there might be a certain sense of entitlement there, or kind of a celebrity persona or something along those lines. It seems like Branch is pretty well salt of the earth. So he and his brother Zion both probably wouldn't be at Georgia if that weren't true. And so, yeah, when it comes to some attention and some accolades and some expectations, honestly, not just the athleticism, which we know that he has, but the way in which it seems like Branch is fitting into the program, I think all of that lead me to believe that, yeah, he can very much be the sort of player that Georgia needs him to be, which is a productive wide receiver and a guy who kind of raises the statistical profile of that group. And by the way, fills in for some, of what, kind of Georgia, got a year ago, even from guys who are no longer here. Some of that is the job of Branch as well. And I think he's set up pretty well to be able to do that.
Your next breakout star is another transfer wide receiver, the one from Texas A&M, Noah Thomas, who headed into this first week. I thought we'd hear a lot more preseason national media hype about Noah Thomas because he's really what Georgia was lacking last year in the wide receiver room. But he's kind of been overshadowed by how excited people are about Zachariah Branch, but another guy that continued to impress during fall camp. I know Jeff Santel's really high on him as his breakout star, so not surprised that you've got him in this spot.
Yeah, I mean, if I had to make a small wager on Georgia's leading receiver, Thomas would actually be my guy that I believe will lead the team in receiving. I think he's faster than people realize. I have a theory that people assume that Texas A&M players are slow. I think they wear ugly uniforms, and I think the players look slower than they actually are. Thomas is faster than people realize. He's also obviously a big-bodied receiver here too. And this was a guy that, while nationally just more people know Zachariah Branch, he came from USC, former 5-star, people just know him better. I would say, though, that what those close to the Georgia program have been at least suggesting to me is that Thomas has been there step for step, every step of the way with Branch. And internally, I think that Noah has been just as impressive as we maybe think that Branch is going to be. So I wouldn't, risk my whole life on this, but small wager here. I think that Thomas probably ends up being Georgia's leading receiver.
Now we'll move to the defensive side of the ball for the next breakout star. It's going to be the 5-star defensive lineman, Elijah Griffin, who we know took a lot of meaningful snaps in camp. I think when it comes to Elijah Griffin breaking out, it's not a matter of if it happens, it's a matter of when it's going to happen.
And as I tout him as a breakout star, I also want to carefully here also temper expectations somewhat, because I don't know what breakout star necessarily means for freshman defensive linemen. I think Griffin's going to play. I think he's going to flash and have some moments. Asking him to be one of this team's best defensive linemen in this particular year, that may still be asking for a lot. But can you come up big in a few big moments? I mean, honestly, that's sort of what Georgia did last year against Texas. I don't know that the defensive front had a great year for Georgia last year, but boy, they sure were great against Texas, and a lot of individual guys contributed to that. I'm speaking primarily here about the game in October in Austin. And so I think that some of that could be true for Griffin too, where he's mostly solid, he's good enough to play, and maybe at the exact right time, he has a couple of moments where he just completely sheds a blocker and goes and makes something great happen. I think this is probably the player on the Georgia roster that has the single highest upside. That may be a year or two away from sort of fully coming into fruition, but he's clearly going to play this year, and there are going to be moments in which I think the Georgia fans are very glad to have it.
Yeah, for him, I think it's all about timing. I wouldn't expect to see some big breakout game early on in the year, especially while he's adjusting to the SEC schedule. I think especially at the defensive line, it takes some time to get used to the physicality that you're going up against. So I think Elijah Griffin will be the one to have the breakout season, but I don't expect that right away. Now, someone who may not even have the option of getting used to the timing is your next breakout star, which is Juan Gaston. And we may be able to look at him as the breakout star of camp, just based on the fact that there's a good chance that he might start game 1, game 2. If not, we know he's going to get into that rotation early on. A lot of preseason buzz, but I don't even think that you and I could have anticipated how quickly he was going to get involved in this offense, that even though they lost a lot on the line, they still bring back some guys, and we know that they have some depth. But for him, he may not have the option of the same amount of timing as Elijah Griffin has.
No, I think you're right. I think he's going to, look, I lean heavily on people who I feel like know more than I do, and people who know more than I do have told me directly they believe that Gaston is one of Georgia's best 5 offensive linemen right now. Now, we have also, especially at the beginning of the season, seen Georgia rotate its offensive line a bunch. So I think there's a chance that Gaston starts. I think there's a chance that when you get to the crucial moments this season, he may be the guy on the field. I also think in the early going, he and Michael Uini and obviously Micah Morris, who we sort of have penciled in at left guard, there may be some rotation here. I'd love to see Daniel Calhoun work his way in and be a part of that too, just because you need as many contributing above the line offensive linemen as you can get. But at the very least, you're going to have a rotation among those 3. And I do think that Gaston has really wowed people since coming in. And I don't know that's what I would have expected him to do fresh out of high school, just for various reasons. It sounds like he was already really impressive on kind of the all-star camp circuit before he came to Georgia. Spring practice seemed to go really well. We're led to believe he's now slimmed down, which makes him an even better player potentially, just has the ability to move a bit better. I think that Juan Gaston is probably one of Georgia's 5 best offensive linemen, and I do think adding in a starter-level player from your high school recruiting class, I think that should definitely be viewed as a very big win for Georgia.
All right, so last one is the big one. It's Ellis Robinson, a guy that we talked about earlier. I think that this is the one person that all of DawgNation wants to see have that breakout season. You don't want all of that money, you spent on Ellis Robinson just sitting on the sideline. So this is a need for Ellis.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in the concept of premium positions. If you look at who in the NFL generates the most free agent dollars, which positions most frequently get drafted in the first round. To me, those are the positions that I think should be considered the most important. It's quarterback, it's offensive tackle, it's wide receiver, it's edge rusher, it's defensive line, and it's cornerback. And listen, Georgia, thankfully, as a Georgia fan, has a lot of very good players. It seems like that a lot of the Georgia players and a lot of the spots where Georgia's strongest are sometimes not quite what the NFL views necessarily as its most premium positions. Well, the potential emergence of Ellis Robinson's a big deal because he does play one of those premium positions. And if you've got the veteran cornerback starting on the other side of Dalen Everett, this gives Georgia to have a chance of at least two really good cornerbacks at one of the most important spots in the field. And, Daniel Harris, I think, is a guy that Georgia's still very happy to have. And, I would say that there's a really good chance that DeMello Jones comes on as well. But the best that I can tell is Robinson may be a little ahead here of the others here right now. He's obviously the guy that has the highest former recruiting ranking. And if he really pops the way that the chat around him suggests might, I think it's a big deal for Georgia because of the position that he plays.
All right, Brandon, now that Dog Bites has come to an end, this is where we started getting to the fun parts of the show that really make it DawgNation at large. I'm excited to have you with us for it. This is Meme Machine.
Who's that coming down the track? Who's that coming down the track? It's a Meme Machine and Red Black. It's a Meme Machine and Red Black. No, no!
Brandon, so if you're not familiar with this is kind of like the equivalent of what your golden shoe is, except we have to go out on the internet and find them on our own. Usually I just go through my Twitter likes from the last week to have to narrow it down. So just to show you how it's done, I'll go first. This is my meme for the week. This is a quote tweet. So the initial tweet says, "What's the masculine urge all guys have?" And our guy Chris Benini here says, "A lot of game left." I am pretty sure that I have heard every single one of my coworkers say that at one point or another.
Yeah, I would say that certainly college football brings this out in us because we have seen a lot of crazy comebacks. And listen, Kaylee, the one thing I think you know about a lot of guys, whether they be guys my age or guys your age, guys sometimes have a reservoir of unearned confidence. And so, this idea that at any point in time, I mean, listen, I'd love to believe here I am in my 40s, that if I really work, hard, by the time I'm 50, maybe I can make the senior tour. Maybe I can go play in the PGA Tour Champions or something like that. As far as I'm concerned in my life, a lot of game left there too. So this is, I would say, a very guy-like thing to sort of believe that it's never quite over. Only the idiots count you out, and you're just one big moment away from proving all the haters wrong. So I would agree that's a very guyish thing to do. And even when you get to be my age, you don't quite grow out of that necessarily. In fact, if anything, it maybe just gets worse.
And now that we're approaching college football season, I wish that I could get a count of just like every single Saturday across the United States. How many times is that said by people just sitting in their homes? Hey, it's okay. A whole lot of game left, All right, Brandon, tell me what you got this week.
All right, so for mine, there's been a little bit of a controversy in my world last day or so. And Kaylee, I don't know how much this sort of overlaps with your culture or not, but a venerable institution, we don't usually use a lot of proper nouns around here when it comes to companies, but we're going to do one in this case. A venerable institution that's been a big part of my life growing up is the Cracker Barrel. It's the place where you go and you get pancakes all throughout the day. They have the little syrup bottles that sort of look like an airplane bottle of alcohol. There's a certain fascination you have as a kid with the Cracker Barrel. Well, the Cracker Barrel has recently undergone a pretty controversial logo change. There's a sort of gross minimalism that I think is taking over American life. I think the Cracker Barrel logo is an example of that. Well, one Georgia fan, it's our guy Skinny on X, has sort of made a comparison between what I think, I can speak for most of our audience when I say, is a pretty obvious downgrade in the Cracker Barrel logo, more minimalist, a little uglier, I would say, in comparison to the Georgia logo of my childhood, the dog face with the Georgia hat. now with a slightly more minimalist. To me, it's just uglier. There are some Georgia fans who seem to like it. I've gotten some feedback on that. I cannot tell you how much I dislike this new sort of dog face logo. And I was pained to admit today that the Cracker Barrel changeover, a change for the worse for Cracker Barrel, is to me pretty similar to what I think is a recent downgrade in Georgia logos here too. So let me ask you two questions. First of all, are you all that aware of the Cracker Barrel? Do you kind of join the sort of throngs of people on the internet who seem to think this is sort of a downgrade in logo for them? And do you agree that the Georgia logo from my sort of era as a child to now also seems to have kind of gotten worse?
I like the old Georgia logo. It looks a little bit scarier, a little bit more intimidating. I am very familiar with the Cracker Barrel, which I can't believe that we're throwing out brand names on the show. I love it. This is like, a very relaxed Brandon Adams. But you're right. There's like a weird obsession when you're a kid with Cracker Barrel. And I think that's because for me, like there's not an interstate that runs through Rome. So we didn't have direct access to a Cracker Barrel. You had to go to Cartersville or Dalton. And so when I came to college at Kennesaw State, there's one right off the exit. So every time Rusty Mansell came passing through, I was like, we're going to Cracker Barrel. And also on top of the logo.
Did you ever play the game where you like had the pegs and you sort of leap the pegs over each other? I never got down to the last one. Never did.
See, I grew up in the age of phones and I hate to lose. So I knew that we were like getting a couple minutes out and I would look it up on my phone.
You cheated at the peg game?
1,000% I did.
Kaylee, that's the most disappointing thing I've ever heard. Who cheats at the peg? You're only playing against yourself.
Hey, my 10-year-old softball coach once told me something that really stuck with me throughout my entire life. And it was specifically about leaving the base early. He said, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying.
There you go.
I apply that to many things in life.
I guess that's true. Then.
But they're also changing the interior of Cracker Barrel. Like, I don't know if you saw that. They're changing the inside to look modern and renovated. And I'm totally anti that.
Let me tell you how much I hate that. With all due respect, listen, if the Cracker Barrel wants to advertise, we'll help tell their story and kind of see if we can give them a brand boost. But I cannot tell you how much I hate all of this. And as a hardcore, not just Southerner, but a rural Southerner, I'm always on guard for like rural Southern things that get targeted for destruction. I would say this is the latest example of someone in a boardroom somewhere and said, hey, a bunch of rural Southerners like this. Let's make sure we squash it and get rid of it. This sort of feels like the latest example of that. And so, yes, I am quite sensitive to all of that.
All right. See, that's what we like with Meme Machine. It's like just good conversation. Whatever comes out of it, that's the best. So I'm glad that we could get our Cracker Barrel opinions established on this show today. Now we'll shift to something else, which is we were actually together on, I believe it was Monday or Tuesday, when Auburn announced that it was going to claim a bunch of national championships from the past. And, for me, like, it is what it is. That doesn't impact my life in any way. Does it come at a weird time? Yeah. But, I mean, it wasn't something that I was like, oh, my God, this is the worst thing in the world. What was your opinion on that before we lead into our fun segment?
So, look, it's obviously dumb, right? I mean, it's the dumbest thing in the world, if for no other reason. One of the titles they claim was in 2004. Well, Kaylee, I was alive in 2000, and I remember that season. There was a national champion. Auburn wasn't it. Now, if they want to say they won 1910 or something like that, who knows? Maybe they did. I mean, honestly, I wasn't alive. I don't even think my grandparents weren't even alive in 1910. So who knows? That's when the Titanic sang, right? Anything could be true. Who knows? 2004, I was here for that, and I know for a fact they didn't win it. So it's obviously dumb, but I tell you, in a roundabout way, the fact that they would do this totally unconcerned for what anybody thinks about them, honestly, in a weird way, I sort of find that commendable. I mean, if nothing else, I think that Georgia ought to claim a few more national championships than it does. So the fact that Auburn's willing to do this, as dumb as it does, to a degree, show a level of bravery because they are clearly unconcerned with criticism because they've been roasted ever since then. But they've already painted this nonsense on their stadium. I mean, they are all in on a bit. So to a certain extent, I got to commend them at least for that.
Yeah, at least if you are going to do something like that, you have to really stand 10 toes down on it. And I see this kind of starting like a domino effect. Do we see other schools start following in their footsteps also doing this?
Well, Georgia should. I mean, look, there's at least one more national championship that Georgia should claim. It's 1946.
Yep.
Now, it's one of those things where, look, to go back to my sort of sensitivity about Southern things, if you want to go back to sort of like mid-century America, 40s, 50s, things like that, and this is well documented, you can read this. There was, I would say, a pretty strong bias against Southern teams and, like, say, the AP poll, stuff like that. There was just a lot of love for, back then there were Northeastern teams and obviously Midwestern teams, kind of an anti-Southern bias. And so one of the reasons why I'm not that mad at Auburn for claiming some extra titles or, Georgia, if it were to do more of this sort of thing is I do think you can go back and find some relatively harsh treatment where, teams should have just been treated better. I think that Georgia in 46 is an example of that. Maybe there are others around the SEC. I'll leave it to them to sort of make the claim for themselves here. But at the very least, I think that Georgia should claim the 1946 national title. And frankly, they should maybe claim a few more.
Because 46 was what? Army and Notre Dame ahead of?
Heck, I don't know. That sounds right.
I think it's like his Army and Notre. I think they ended at a tie. Georgia finished out in third. Because I was kind of looking back through some stuff too. That was the only national championship that I felt confident in bringing on this show. I mean, yeah. I feel like you could also use this as a way. Georgia should be able to claim Justin Fields. He started there. Yeah. They're the ones that recruited him. Let's let him claim it. I don't even know what you could do with the Tyler Simmons was onside. Like, Georgia should be able to claim that. I don't know if you can claim a national championship, but you should be able to do something with that.
I think what you do at Auburn style is you wait a couple of decades and then you claim the 2017 national title and say, hey, we got robbed by the officials. We claim the national title. At that point in time, people sort of forget, memories start to fade a bit. You can sort of do that then. I'll give you another one, Kaylee. I claim this past year's basketball national champion. As far as I'm concerned, Georgia's the reigning college basketball national champions. Florida won the tournament, but I'm a big head-to-head guy.
I love it.
Georgia beat Florida. We all saw it happen. So therefore, in the old theory of to be the man, you got to beat the man. As far as I'm concerned, Georgia's the basketball national champions. I'll claim that.
Could we claim something with Todd Gurley? Like, now that the NIL stuff is happening, should we be able to make him like a Heisman with an asterisk?
So I think Gurley's a good example of that, but I'll also kind of go back to sort of earlier era. You and I did high school the other day, Andrew Beard from Prince Avenue Christian. His uncle is Garrison Hurst. And I'm telling you right now, Garrison Hurst should have won the 1992 Heisman. What Georgia, in the case of Todd Gurley, they should have just never let him be suspended. That's Georgia's own fault. To once again go back to what I said earlier about being too worried about what other people think, Georgia was petrified what people might think if they dared play Todd Gurley with the accusation of he signed a few autographs hanging over his head, which in retrospect seems silly. Guess what? I lived through it. It was stupid at the time. But nonetheless, that's that. But in the case of Garrison Hurst, I'm telling you right now, he should have won the 1992 Heisman Trophy over Gino Toretta, who did win it. Marshall Faulk was a part of it. We saw Reggie Bush get his Heisman taken away. Mm-hmm. I don't know if we're authorized to take somebody else's Heisman from him. We got to take Gino Toretta's Heisman. We got to give it to Garrison Hurst. If I had the power to sort of claim something, I'm claiming Garrison Hurst as the 1992 Heisman. As a child of the 90s, this is very, very personal for me.
All right, Brandon, we're going to start to wrap things up here. Anything else that Georgia should be able to claim?
Well, hopefully they'll claim something this year, which is the difference between Georgia and Auburn. Auburn, if I'm an Auburn fan, it would make me very nervous of how they feel about their present tense situation. If right before the season begins, they're going back and claiming a whole bunch of titles from the past, it would lead me to believe that maybe my team is a little bit worried about what it might claim for this upcoming year. So hopefully Georgia doesn't have to go back and try to rewrite history. Hopefully it can claim something here in the current present tense world, which is what we really want anyway.
I think you're right about that. All right, so this is how we typically end DawgNation at Large. I extend the question to Connor Riley. I'm going to extend the question to you as well. What did you learn today, Brandon?
I learned that you cheat at solo games, which is actually just like really sad to me. The peg game at Cracker Barrel, which I do love, I learned that you cheated at that, which I guess in a roundabout way is, I'm not even sure I'd even know how to search to find the solution to that puzzle. So I guess in some ways I'm impressed. In a totally different way, it's very, very sad that you're the Connor Stallions of eating Cracker Barrel.
Hey, but think about how impressive it is when they're watching me do it, and then I show them, and it's like, wow.
Especially if you do it like really fast, like one of those savants.
You can't do that because then they're gonna know.
Yeah, that's a good point.
All right, if that's what you learned today, I'll take that. I expose myself. Brandon, thank you so much for joining me on this Thursday. It has been my absolute pleasure and honor.
Did I live up to dream guest status?
I would say that. Yeah, I would put you in that category.
Well, I'm glad. I'm very.
I
happy
wish
with it.
one day in the future you'll have to do it with myself and Connor and Cody and get the full experience of the
We'll do whole
show.
thing.
All right. Well, with that, thank you so much for joining us, DawgNation. Thank you so much for joining us. We'll see you right back here next Thursday. Oh my gosh, first game of the season. We'll talk about it then. We'll see you next Thursday.